reparations. Like, I feel like it's impossible. We can't repair what has been done. All we can do is dissolve this nation state.
Yeah.
And on every systematic level, there's a disparity for Black people, and so meeting those gaps are where we need to start, and then maybe we can have a conversation about racial healing and reparations. But without the acknowledgement of the need, anything extra doesn't mean anything.
So given what we've talked about, and we've asked this everywhere we go, what are your thoughts about reparations? When you hear the word reparations, what does that mean to you? How would it look? How would it look for you if it worked? If you think it's important, what would it look like?
To me, it's like reparation is starting standards, starting over, and making things right. And that's a lot of, it take a lot to do that. It's not just a word, it takes a lot to do it.
To me, it's not only leveling the playing field, so to speak, but just that empowerment piece, right? That comes along with it. And who knows? I may not see it come to fruition, okay? But I'm hoping that 3-4 generations down the road, somebody else is having a different conversation around this table than what we're having right now, right?
Good afternoon, everyone. What a wonderful start for what I know is going to be very exciting and moving dialogue this afternoon. I'm Charlie Hale. I'm Dean of Social Sciences here at UC Santa Barbara, and it's my great privilege to introduce this dialogue this afternoon. I want to start with an expression of deep gratitude to MCC Director Onar Primitivo, and to all the MCC staff for opening this wonderful space for us once again in support of collaboration between the MCC and the Division of Social Sciences. When I first learned of the Reparations Project, this is before I met Sarah Eisner, its co-founder, the flash of recognition followed almost instantly. We have to find a way to bring this to UC Santa Barbara. That resolve grew stronger after a dinner conversation with Sarah, together with her husband Noah and her son Ben, and with Sharon Tedegaw, the director of the Center for Black Studies Research, and Rocio Torres. Today, less than a year later, we've taken another exciting step toward that aspiration with the joint visit of Sarah and Randy Quarterman to our campus. Randy, it's a great pleasure and an honor to welcome you to UC Santa Barbara. Randy was born in Okinawa, Japan, to a Japanese mother and an African-American dad. Randy narrates his story on the Reparations Project website with moving honesty and deep insight. His early years in Japan, the family's move to the U.S., where he confronts the shock of pervasive racism in U.S. society, a 20-year stint in the Army, and eventually back to Savannah, Georgia, where the Quarterman family had lived since the time of chattel slavery. Roy Quarterman, his father's wishes for his newborn son, Randy, the narrative continues, shares a powerfully disturbing truth. Quote, "What he really wanted from me was to be a Japanese citizen, so I would not experience the horrors he did as a black man in America," unquote. Gradually, as the years pass, Randy comes to affirm his own identity, which embodies a calm, resolute defiance of systemic racism, its legacy since slavery, and its ongoing manifestations. Randy met Sarah in 2019, and together they co-founded the Reparations Project, which we just got a little snippet from just now. Sarah was born and raised in California and is a proud gaucho, BA in political science, and she shares pointedly a series of very deeply influential courses in Black studies. She narrates her story on the site as well, how she learned additional details about her ancestors' roles as owners of a plantation in Georgia, how the formerly enslaved Quarterman family achieved land in the 1880s, and how currently a man named Randy Quarterman was fighting to keep that land in the family. Sparked by this deepened knowledge of her family's past and intensifying national conversation about reparations, Sarah decided to assign top priority to confronting this colossal challenge. She writes, quote, "I know in my bones that reparations are due because I carry the trauma my ancestors witnessed and meted out in my DNA, and also because of the systemic racism I witness personally today," unquote. The Reparations Project supports rigorous study of racism and anti-racist social change, a goal that dovetails beautifully with the mission of our division, the Division of Social Sciences, and more specifically with the Department of Black Studies, which is partnering with the project toward those ends. From there, the project leads by example to demonstrate what concrete actions toward reparations look like. And in so doing, the project is meant to motivate others to critically reflect on our history, and crucially, as Sarah states, to call in white Americans to learn about and support this work. My first inclination was to explain that initial flash of recognition, referring to my own past as an activist scholar, accompanying Central American Black and Indigenous communities in struggles for rights to territory and resources. But to go there would risk falling into the trope that white people often turn to in moments of racial reckoning, a trope that Resmaa Menakem calls, quote, "trotting out your racial resume." The message of the Reparations Project requires much more humility and vulnerability. But really? I come from a family who never lived in the South, whose liberal credentials put us on the right side of history, opposing slavery, abhorring Jim Crow, siding with the civil rights movement. So we get a pass, don't we? Nope. The side of my family that comes from Minnesota is currently engaged in a painful journey of reflection on northern manifestations of white supremacy. And more specifically, sorry, I wasn't using my microphone. Hope you were hearing me here. We're an intimate group. And more specifically, the lynching of 3 black men in 1920 in the town of Duluth, where my great-grandparents lived. Research documents widespread repudiation of this act of domestic terrorism after it occurred. We sincerely hope to learn that my great-grandparents joined in this repudiation. But if so, why the silence in our family oral histories? And how to confront the submission in our own family's past to a culture and political economy of white supremacy, with clear benefits to us and tangible harm to Black and Indigenous peoples. The reason to engage in this reflection, as Sarah states in her narrative, is not to induce guilt, and it must be deeply vigilant to avoid what she calls, quote, the white savior complex. Instead, this collective reckoning must emerge from and affirm our deepest values of intersectional justice, of racial justice, of the pressing need to confront the harm that white supremacy afflicts, both past and present. Only then can we be inspired by the profound healing effects of speaking our truths, of mourning the effects of systemic racism, and of forging ties of solidarity and struggle for anti-racist futures. This is what I understand the fundamental purpose of the Reparations Project to be, which we're so excited to learn about today as Randy and Sarah engage in dialogue with Christopher McAuley, professor and co-chair of the Black Studies Department. Chris is a political theorist with specializations in African politics, World Systems Theory, Black Intellectual History, Caribbean and Latin American Political Economy. His most recent monograph is Spirit versus the Souls, Max Weber, W.E.B. Du Bois, and the Politics of Scholarship. Thank you, Chris, for playing this role of moderation. Please join me in welcoming, in giving a warm Santa Barbara welcome to Randy, Sarah, and Chris McAuley.
I'll go up this way.
Okay.
They put me far away over here.
I can barely see you.
I know, you know. Actually, so Sarah, Randy, welcome, UC Santa Barbara. Sarah, I know for you it's a bit of a homecoming. Randy, I know this is your first time, and we said earlier over lunch that it is a pretty campus. The weather was great for you on this first day of your visit. Let me start, Sarah, with you. What moved you? Just give me the context, or give us the context of your, your frame of mind. What was happening that moved you to actually send that text, or that email message rather, to Randy?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is extremely full circle for me. My freshman dorm is like 50 yards away. And so let's see if I can make a long story short. I had left the tech world and jumped into creative writing, and I was writing nonfiction about sort of success and shame and motherhood and race in Silicon Valley, and I kind of had done a bunch of that and thought, well, now let me try fiction, and I'm going to try and write a novel loosely based on my ancestors in Georgia. And so I started kind of getting into that state of mind, in a fiction state of mind, and I found myself, sitting in this beautiful place in Silicon Valley, writing fiction about, the 1800s in the South, and realizing, like, actually I could be writing truth. And I had always known the history of my family. I had known that we owned plantations and we had enslaved humans. And I thought, why not dig in deeper into that truth? And I had also been doing a lot of courses on whiteness and how to hold whiteness more responsibly and things like this from like 2010 on. And so, I don't know, the stars kind of aligned to where I was like, I need to look deeper into my family history and also try to do something, potentially try to share some of the history and knowledge I have with some of the descendants, if I can locate them and if they'll be generous enough to speak with me, that I have about family lineage. And I have been talking to some folks like at our Black Ancestry, and I had heard, if you have this information, put it out there. And so kind of, and it was like, Trump was president, and I was like, I gotta do something. Yeah, everything kind of, and it was, I was very aware that I needed to offer Randy or whomever I was gonna reach out to something, not just say, hey, guess what? Here's who I am, do you wanna talk to me? And so I'd heard this story from my cousin that this family potentially still owned this land, and so I kind of Googled Quarterman, and I was extremely, just very cognizant that this might not work, and incredibly lucky to specifically find Randy. As you'll hear, his background puts him in a specific place to receive my inquiry very generously. So I'm just very lucky that it was received well.
So naturally, Randy, that begs the question, why is it that you were in such a receptive frame of mind when it is that you actually saw this email message from Sarah, someone whom you did not know, but you received it positively, because very clearly this is the result. Just tell us something about, as you reflect on that, why was that the case? What what made it that was the case?
First, I would like to thank the Gaucho Nation for inviting me. I try to keep the colors for you guys to represent here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored. I'm humbled to be here. To answer that question, me serving 20 years in the military, of course, as an adult, spending 4 combat tours in Iraq, knowing what we did to them as a country, on top of being a multi-race child, being raised in Japan the whole time till I was 12 and understanding what America was about at 12 years old, kind of broadened my mind more to be acceptable of people more than my own peers and my own culture would be. So it was not a hard thing to understand the humility in anything, because I wasn't raised as a child from birth in anger of what the nation does to black people. So I kind of understood more of what she was saying, but it opened the box. It opened the box for me, for my own family, the questions I never asked, because I was trying to figure out what did it mean to be a black man in America at the same time, all my life, as a teen and as an adult. How do I fit in? A lot of places I didn't feel like I fit in. A lot of places, these perceptions was already put in my mind that I saw it that way before it really was that way. So yeah, that's what opened my heart to Sarah. She's a genuine person. Even though I might say some negative things, she'll be like, no, it's like this, you know. So I appreciate that a lot.
I hear you. And you talked now, Randy, about, of course, when it is after the first 12 years in Okinawa, and you come now to Monteith, is it? Right, outside of Savannah. And that initiating this experience of kind of becoming a black American, right? And navigating, you know, that identity and those perceptions. Tell us just something more, though, about, you know, your personal, how it is that the Quarterman history, right? What did you know about the Quarterman history from your dad, or first in Japan, right, say, and then also when it is that you got to Monteith, what is it that you knew about the Quarterman history, right? And how far back?
Okay, till I left Japan, I knew nothing of the Quarterman family. I just knew my name was Quarterman. I actually didn't even started speaking English till I was 5 in New Mexico, where my father had to be stationed at for 1 year before we went back to Okinawa. I understood English, but I didn't speak it back. I spoke back in Japanese. So, you know, being in Albuquerque, New Mexico, my father would tell me, so the kids used to come to the house and say, hey, this guy understands what I'm saying, but he's speaking back in some funny language. So one day, what he told me, I just started speaking English, just out the blue. It just came. For the Quarterman, the history of the Quartermans, all I knew was to my grandfather. That's all that was discussed, and anything further was what my grandfather was telling my family was that the men in the family, which there was 4 men that he refers to as his uncles and his father, there was 3 of them was brutally murdered before there was 30, and 1 lived to about 58. But it was just the horror of knowing what happened to them, just being murdered. So my grandfather lived in Jim Crow fear the whole time. Even my father did. My grandfather and my father. Right.
And then, so there was no, I mean, we'll come to Zeke in a little bit, but there was no mention of Zeke. There was no mention of even the land, right? Or was there mention?
Yeah, the land was mentioned.
Right.
My grandfather in like 1974, he took his cousin to court to gain control of the land, which he didn't become executor. The judge appointed another law firm to actually be the executor because there was quarrels between 2 families. I don't think that was known. My grandfather always told me, "Oh, this is heirs' property. This is for the Quarterman men." That's how he explained it, which we understand the land process of being passed through men generation, not women.
Right.
So that's what he believed, and that's all we knew.
Okay. And Sarah, I'm just, we talked about this over lunch a little bit, but you had just mentioned that in your family, and particularly when it is that you would make those trips back to Savannah area, right, to visit your grandparents, your family history was acknowledged, it was known, but then of course that also, makes one wonder, how much was it discussed? What sorts of things were kind of stated? What sort of things were omitted in the retelling of that family history?
Yeah, I would say I remember, as I told you, the first time I kind of asked questions about it was in this family cemetery where all of my ancestors are buried on my mother's side, and they're all Keller, and then there's one small headstone that says Rachel Butler, and I remember being very young, under 10 probably, when I, said, well, this is different, who is this? And my mom very honestly told me she was an enslaved woman, and told me the story. She was buried here because one of the family members said, well, I can't rest without Mom Rachel in the cemetery, and so they, buried her in the cemetery, which could be told as and probably was told as a loving story for many years. And to me, it was a horrific story because Rachel had been buried away from her own family. And that's when I started sort of asking questions. And it wasn't that it wasn't told to me. I mean, they were bringing me to this cemetery. They were telling me, yes, this was a plantation. Yes, slavery happened here. Yes, our family was involved. But certainly it wasn't, let's talk about it a lot, and let's make you very aware of the specific legacy of that institution and how we are complicit and how everyone else is, how there wasn't to that extent. I consider myself really lucky that I was always told the truth. And that it was told to me freely, and I was brought there, and there was no fear about, oh, we got to cover this up. But most of my inquiry is what led to, learning more about who were the people that were enslaved. How could I possibly find their descendants? But I think I learned to do that, though, from the examples my grandparents set. They were both, public school teachers that went through the whole integration process and were very for that, and took me to the Black church in Savannah whenever I came, and they were part of the Black community, and so I saw them participating in that community. I did not explicitly see them trying to tell me about the past, that's for sure. And I think it was extremely hurtful and harder for them to talk about it because they had known and loved people who had, been alive closer to the time and had lived through segregation and had participated in segregation. So it's been easier for me to interrogate, that lifestyle looking back. And I'm lucky they've told me everything they know.
Sorry, so I was wondering if in part of that history that was told, if there had been any mention of the fact that I think it was your great, I know there are a lot of greats there, grandfather had left land to Zeke Quarterman. Had any mention been made of that?
No.
At all?
And I don't think my mom even knew that.
Okay.
I think my grandmother did, but she died fairly young, and I never had a conversation about that. But who knew, my distant cousin, who I should acknowledge is friends with Randy now and lives down the street, has been really helpful to us in uncovering some of these stories that I never heard, being a California kid. And so he's the one that mentioned the Quarterman name, said, I think this land is still owned by them, and was the reason I was able to find Randy.
Okay. And just for clarification, so this Zeke Quarterman is, Randy, correct me if I'm wrong here, so this is your great-great-great-grandfather, right? Whom, I'm forgetting what that killer, George Keller, had actually, quote-unquote, owned, right, Zeke. And then in emancipation had left Zeke this acreage, right, that's still in the family. And just to kind of to fast forward so that we kind of recognize the degree to which this is quite a contemporary issue, right? The Quartermans are still fighting, right, to essentially claim legal title to land that we have on record as having been passed on to the family, right? And they've been paying taxes on it. Can you explain to us or to the audience what's the complication here that makes it such that although in certain sense this is a recognized document, it still is not the case that the Quartermans actually owned this land?
So Zeke didn't leave a dying will, so then it becomes a cloudy title because there's no direct passing of estate, and generations went along the same thing, even though our tax papers say Zeke Quarterman, property of Zeke Quarterman, you know, and the executor and such, but to be clear, title of direct ownership of us is not recognized by the state, so that's lost. So that was our first conversation, was because our first acre was being taken by eminent domain by the state because they was trying to they're building a parkway. So they offered us $2,500 for the acreage. The negotiator was stating that, hey, you know, if you could produce clear title, you could get this $2,500, but if not, it'll go into some kind of escrow or something where till we prove that we have clear title, it'll just sit there. So that conversation was just, that's it, that's all he said. Like, good luck with that. That's the email, like, good luck with producing a clear title. So I forwarded Sarah that email, we both got kind of pissed. So we was like, hey, Sarah's like, hey, look, we got to do something. And we just started having conversations about it. When we took it to New York to have a conversation, it opened a little bit more doors. Then she said, hey, I have a friend, Katie Basil, you know, she's going to try to help us. And that been the link to almost saving our stuff. I mean, it's been 3-4 years now, but it's better than where we was from.
So I just wanted to make things clear. So the state didn't have any problem taking the tax money, right?
Absolutely.
And I don't suspect that they would actually, and since we're on the theme of reparations, I don't think they would have a problem paying you back for the taxes that you actually paid them for all those years that it.
Yes. Yeah, we talking
anyway,
Georgia here.
this is just, right? So just on this issue of land now, because of course the other land issue, right, was in many ways a catalyst for the Quarterman Keller Foundation, right? And so that was George, right, Keller, who had bequeathed the I guess the lion's share of his acreage to, it was the Georgia.
It was his daughters,
Oh,
his
oh,
last living
oh,
daughters.
okay, I'm sorry.
Who then bequeathed it to the Georgia Baptist Foundation.
Okay,
yeah.
the Georgia.
Yeah.
And so, can you just elaborate something about because that to me was a really fascinating story, and yeah, what the Georgia Baptist Foundation did with the property.
And also I want to say, shout out to Katie. Thank you, Katie. She's here tonight.
Hey, Katie.
Because she helped us get the attorneys that were still, you know, fighting for this with. So another story I always knew was that that the last living children of George Adam Keller, and he had 12 children and had kids into his 70s, so they were still alive in the 60s and 70s, these two daughters. And they gave all of that land, I think it was at least 1,000 acres, to the Georgia Baptist Foundation. and said, when you're ready, sell this land, and we want it put in a trust for scholarships for rural students. And actually, I forgot to tell you this part, and actually mostly for women, because there were 2 women that had gone to a Georgia Baptist Foundation college for women, Tift College. But by the time they passed and the Georgia Baptist Foundation sold the land and established the trust, Tift College was closed. There are 3 other very conservative Baptist colleges that the Georgia Baptist Foundation supports. This $1 million scholarship fund trust is used for students just for those 3 schools. The family church where my family cemetery is, it's a tiny little church, but they are a Georgia Baptist church, and they work with the Georgia Baptist Foundation to pick the scholars. So that story had always seemed kind of nice to me, like, okay, well, I didn't benefit from money made on slave-holding land, at least. It's going to scholarships. But then as we started doing this work, I started thinking, wait, where's it going and which kind of scholars? And so I talked to all of my living family, and I'll probably say this a million times, but I'm just so lucky that my family supports all this work, and everyone agreed, yes, some of that money should go to Black education. I mean, duh. So we started trying to convince the Georgia Baptist Foundation and that family church, which no family still goes to, but the preacher there, to kind of work together with us and support us in trying to at least get a percentage of that money, and to carve it off and give it to Spelman, because Black education in Georgia and women as the original. So we tried to say, like, this is the original intent, you know. Yeah, that did not work, as you might imagine. And by the time we were like done trying to fight for that, we were like, who wants to work with the Georgia Baptist Foundation anyway on this? Let's do it ourselves. And that's when we said, we got to get a 501c3 going and start up some scholarships at Spelman.
Right. And I thought the other little piece in the story that was really fascinating is that when you pressed the Georgia Baptist, yes.
Well, I did a bunch of research and pressing and said, okay, who can you give me, how many scholars have scholarships now, what amount of money? They told me, I said, and what are the demographics and how many are Black? And they said, oh, we don't collect that information. So I'm like, okay, they're all white. And would I even want to be supporting sending Black scholars to these incredibly conservative white Baptist colleges anyway? So that's, there was no way to alter that trust.
Yes, right. So now, Randy, the Quarterman Keller Foundation, right, supports the very projects that other institutions, let's say, right, are not supporting. Can you tell me, or can tell us, both of you just telling me the sort of projects and the sort of where the monies have gone, right? The sort of projects that you've actually funded, those sorts of things.
Yeah. So actually, we have close to 20 scholars. Majority of them are in Spelman, Morehouse, Clark, Atlanta. We have 4 in Georgia Southern University. And then we help the Gullah Geechee family preserve their land, whether through our organization, of course, but what they do is if any families have tax issues before their land is taken, they'll help them with that. So preserving, because we are with education, land preservation, and truth-telling, and Black art. So we try to enforce those 4 ideas we have to make sure that's done.
Okay. And of course, the other thing that that raises or makes me then think about what have been the reactions generally from various communities, also from family members, from friends, from people on the outside who are seeing the 2 of you do this. What kind of reactions have you encountered? And also, I mean, with that, what have been some of the obstacles in certain cases? What have been some of the surprises in the way of, you know, really positive reactions that have facilitated what it is that you're doing?
One reaction I could tell you that's kind of, it's not negative, but it's just, in Monteith, we had a land grant for the Promised Land, which was, the Promised Land was supposed to be, the folklore is General Sherman's final march to the sea. That 40 acres was supposed to be the 40 acres in the mule that Mr. Steele helped get the Sherman general soldiers water. So that 40 acres was supposed to be given to them. So this is in Monteith. Mr. Bill Johnson and Bob Johnson bought the land from the Steele family. So they started doing farming there. So they became elder in age and trying to hold on to their land, not being taken. They're still paying, you know, taxes. Everything's upkeep. It's just the point of the lack of funds for their type living, right? So we gave them $10,000 for the land grant, but the backside of that is, how do the Quarterman family get to decide within the community who gets the money? So those conversations happen where what makes our family the deciding factor where this money goes. So we tried to do the giving circle, which what we wanted to do with that was make them decide that this money is going there. So it is positive, but at the same time, when you know the deep-rooted South of elderlies, their trust for reparation isn't there because of the trauma they've been through. Like for my family, they never left since slavery, really. They didn't take part of the Reconstitution where they migrated to the North or nothing. They stayed there. So they endured all this trauma in the South to it. So when my uncle's like, you know, when we went to New York and he says, hey, I'm a slave, you know, that in his mind, that's the inferior mind frame that he has of what he sees himself as. So it's positive when it comes to scholars and professors and students. It's very positive. This work is very positive. But sometimes when you get down to the roots, you know, those are where the challenges come, and the hesitation and the paranoia comes of what's this about.
No, thank you, Randy.
Yeah, I mean, we're in such different situations. Like, you know, Randy's living in the town where we kind of started with, like, how do we do reparations in Monteith, Port Wentworth, Savannah area? And we kind of at first, like Randy said, thought like, okay, well, maybe we'll give them a bunch of money and they can decide how to use it, or we'll do applications and see which descendant families we can give grants to, kind of like an application process, kind of like they're trying in Evanston. And then we saw other places try it and realize like, whoa, there's a lot of not only broad problems with assuming we know how to do reparations in this community, but also putting Randy in the position to just even talk about reparations in a place where that's not really being talked about much. So it's a very hot, uncomfortable conversation, and you have a lot of members of the Black community saying, I don't want to talk about that for understandably fearful reasons. So he's kind of like, okay, I'll try to do reparations here, and he's getting sort of like, he said, why do you get to decide who's deserving and who's not? So we had to feel our way around that a lot. I think where and Randy can talk about like how it went with his own family too. I won't spend a ton I could talk forever about how grateful I am that I can't even like express how positive my family and friends have been in supporting this. I am blown away like immediately. I mean, most of my friends don't have this, and I'm sure we'll get into this, don't have the specific history of knowing their ancestors were enslavers. but immediately got it and said, I've benefited from white supremacy too. I understand that I want to help redistribute some wealth. I believe in you and Randy and what you're doing. And I mean, it's nothing, it's been, you know, life affirming for me to have that happen.
Sarah, who are your friends and where do you live?
Because
I clearly need to move. No.
Bay Area. Yeah, and from across the country, not just, you know, around me. But and I do want to make sure I say, I think the most amazing part of what kind of reaction have I gotten from people is, you know, part of why I wanted to do this was I was and am raising 2 white sons, and I needed them to understand the truth of history and also see it in context of not shame or guilt, but responsibility. And I think it could have very easily, they could have very easily been like, whoa, what do you, like, why are you talking about this? Like, you know, all my friends are gonna, not, I mean, just total support and go mom. So, I mean, and that's what I'm just glad that they were supportive and that they're learning their responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Just out of curiosity, have you because right now the reparations project is roughly 3 going on 4 years old?
Yeah.
Right? And in that time, have you encountered another team like yourselves actually doing this?
Yes and no, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Not really.
not the same, like with the family intertwined,
Right.
but partners, white and black, working on reparations together as partners, yes, but definitely not quite the same.
Okay, all right. And sorry, you just alluded to Randy, or perhaps Randy saying something about how it is that your family specifically responded to, or has responded to the reparations project, and what it is that you're doing right now. If you could maybe elaborate, if you feel.
For my father, you know, he's like, hey, you know, you're bringing Zeke names alive. You know, you're honoring Zeke.
Okay, very good.
And you're the perfect person for it. Being multicultural, multiracial, identify separately. He's like, hey, you're honoring Zeke. Zeke will live forever now.
Okay.
You know, where before Zeke was never discussed, so he was just erased out of our memory. My grandfather knew. Same cemetery, going back to what she was telling, the same cemetery, I remember at 14, 15 years old, we used to go cut that grass. We used to cut North Baptist Salem Church. My grandfather actually had a relationship, I think, with one of your aunts. I think she was going to give us a pathway into our property because we was landlocked out during that time.
Okay.
You know, during the 80s and 90s, we couldn't even get in. But before her aunt died, she was supposed to give us a pathway easement in, but when she died, nobody else honored it. But I understood my grandfather had a relation. He knew the history. He just didn't share it with us. He was a man that couldn't read. So I don't know if that played a lot of part in him, of his own self-doubt of himself, that he just didn't want to deal with certain things. So this coming along, going with him to go cut the grass, living on the property that he bought from the Kellers, why me? So my family's more like, you're the leader now. Go ahead, do what you're going to do. But they're more hesitant of coming out here, speaking out. And I understand the trauma. They're not comfortable. So I don't mind being that voice for them.
Now, you had alluded to the fact earlier that the scholars, you know, have been supportive. And I guess in what way, and also how is it that, you know, the university or the university settings have actually been welcoming or encouraging? I'm just kind of curious how that's worked.
I would say, I mean, they've been incredibly like vulnerable with us, and they'll kind of like hear us tell our story, and then they'll kind of tell theirs back to us when we're having conversations like this, and it's just like, and a lot of times I'll say, well, I didn't think to ask my grandfather, you know, about this, and now I'm going to. And the students at Spelman Morehouse and Clark Atlanta have done oral histories with Randy's family and mine, and they were trained to do that, and then did it, and then a number of them have said, I've gone back and done oral histories for my grandparents now, and I'm so glad I did, and you know, things like that. But also just, so for, and then specifically for me as a white woman to be able to be in that space, I'm always just shocked and honored that they will have me there. It's, you know, all of these incredible Spelman Morehouse and Clark Atlanta students telling their stories, sharing their experiences, and I just feel like it's a total gift to me. I mean, it's amazing. And just have it, I mean, them even saying we care to listen to you, you know, to me is like incredible to me. So I don't know how you feel, but I think we both, every time we walk away from a conversation with the students, we're like, this is what we need to be doing, talking to more like young people and people in the community, and just hearing stories back after we tell ours.
I mean, great, brilliant minds, young minds, you know, doing the social justice work. As you can see, that's part of it. That's just like maybe a second of what they discuss.
Yeah.
They're so raw, because reparations could be in 1,000 ways. You know, it's just not funds. It can mean in so many ways, and their discussions in that makes us like, hey, that's an idea. You know, but at the same time, just hearing them and engaging in that, and on top of me sharing my Black experience and what this journey took me through my own family, makes them think of their own path and their own questions that they didn't ask their own family. So that's the great interpersonal part that I enjoy, that this thing of, in our community, don't ask. You don't ask about your past. You know, that's being broken. That should be more of what's being discussed within the family and shared, because history matters. You know, how the past, it'll reflect what your future and presents are, because if you don't have it, you know, it could do a lot to a psyche.
And on that point of history mattering, when it seems that, well, that doesn't seem, when it is that our histories are under attack, right? How does that then make you feel about the work that you're doing in our current, I mean, Sarah, you had referenced in part of the catalyst being Trump's presidency, right? You know, now we have various governors, but one in particular who will remain unnamed, right? Who's essentially attempting to silence, right, this truth-telling, this history-telling, precisely because he's aware of the fact that history does matter, right? So I'm just kind of, I'm curious in this particular climate, right? And it seems to be, sadly, at least for some of this country, it seems to be a climate that's going to continue, right? How do you see the work that you're doing on all fronts?
Well, it's much needed. You know, even just having this forum, somebody's going to take it and discuss it with somebody else, and somebody else going to discuss it. Say, hey, I want to look at that and be curious. It's one family at a time. Of course, the whole population ain't going to change at one, but who do we know who we will affect? That makes that change, that makes that call in the future to say, hey, no, it's going to be like this now. So having these conversations within family members is great, right? I would challenge any white person that know their history to share like Sarah did. Of course, the fear of even myself when she's around the scholars, you know, I think as a Black person, like, man, I hope she don't get attacked or nothing. You know, like, But her courage in that, coming in that space, that prevents it. That prevents that outrage displayed on her, because you got to respect that, coming forth like that into that circle of the unknown. You have to respect it. So if somebody's willing to do that, and that humanity inside of them, you know it's genuine. You can't go against it. And with, I know I'm in a tech place, but not discrediting social media, nothing. It's nothing like a human interaction, face to face, eye to eye.
Amen.
Nothing. You know, you will know exactly what it is when you facing that person instead of behind the camera. So when that happens, this could happen where we hear.
Yeah, yeah.
You're listening. This can happen. It just takes that forth of effort and courage to do that. And I challenge my community, just listen. Hold back the rage. We understand. We understand. We know all we went through. But if we don't give it a shot, where are we going to go? Are we going to just stay angry and stay a victim forever? Or are we going to own our own future?
Thank you for saying that. And I think part of it for me is realizing, like, it takes a certain kind of courage, but I'm not actually in real danger. Whereas Randy's ancestors were, you know, and so however worried or nervous I might be about saying the wrong thing, that's not real danger. And so you just do it anyway. And I have run into a lot of white people say, I think I have a history like you do, but I don't want to ask about it. I don't really want to talk about it. I try to encourage them too. But anyway, I agree with everything Randy said. And I think, although I did mention Trump, generally this is a non-political, non-polarizing way I have found. Like, nobody has ever said, this is so wrong what you're doing, like interfamily repair. You know, like, I mean, we're not saying you have to give up your house for reparation. And we're not, that's not part of it anyway, but like, we're just saying, open your heart and tell the truth and look into what the history is, what the truth is, and what could possibly be changed, made better for the future. And I really have never heard, I have, you know, acquaintances or whatever that I can tell aren't engaging when they hear what I do. You know, they're like, oh, that's cool. But no one has ever said, how could you do that? You know, like, I mean, it's just, and so I think where a lot of people might not understand what reparations could be and might say, I don't want to talk about that, when they hear just families coming together and talking about what can be done, it's apolitical kind of.
Right. And I know something else that you also do is, and I just have a couple more questions and we'll open it to the floor, but is it called repossessions? Yeah, and which I'm wondering if that's a way of almost encouraging people to kind of take up what it is that you did. But could you both say something about repossessions, what it is, and how it is that actually can facilitate this process?
Yeah, I've kind of led that one. I'll take it. I have some ephemera from my family, such as a map, a beautiful watercolor map of rice plantations along the Savannah River. That it wasn't specifically our family map or anything, but somebody in the family purchased it and it was kept. It's beautiful. It's you know, but it's, I mean, I don't want that on my wall, and I know that there's a deeper truth beneath, you know, the beautiful watercolor map of the rice plantation. So it started because I have a friend, Rodney Ewing, an amazing black artist who was in San Francisco and now is in New York. And Rodney was doing another thing that I was talking with him about, and I said, I have this map. You know, would you like to have it and like do whatever you want with, like, contextualize it? or not, whatever. And he held on to it for a year, and he said, yes, I want to think about it. And then he said, I'm done, here it is. And he had overlaid this, map of plantations with the bones of slave quarters and words and just images that were he just made this incredibly powerful piece of art. And my thought was, well, I want to pay you for this, but I don't want it. I want it to be out in public for, deeper truth telling. And then started thinking, well, what about other white folks who have family ephemera from the slavery era? Could they offer up both that ephemera and money to pay Black artists to contextualize that ephemera, and then also never ask for that art back, but as an act of repair and reparations, give that up, pay money, and also have that art travel around wherever our amazing Black curator, Bridget Cooks, who's a professor at UC Irvine, wherever she selects the show to go. And so she is working with donors that have produced ephemera, whether it's a photograph, a ledger of enslaved people that they have from their family. We found some Confederate money, and my mom found some. We're going to use that. Just different things that Bridget works with Black artists to see, are they interested in contextualizing these pieces and telling, a larger story, and then being part of this traveling exhibit. And so, yes. And once again, Katie, the attorney, has stepped up to help us draft all those contracts, and it's very complicated, but we're getting there. And yes, I have found there are some white people that have told me, oh my gosh, I do have this history. I didn't know how to talk about it, but I have this piece of paper that I can offer you. And that has been their first step into the process of and then of course we're going to force them to really dig in and actually talk about the history if they want to be part of the exhibit. But it's been a way for them to start with a piece of art, or with something in the realm of art, with something that they can just sort of say, take this, and then kind of drawing out their story. So we're really excited about Bridget's work, and yeah.
Okay. Well, I am on a strict schedule here. Rocio. No. So I am going to open the floor to questions. And I might need some, I don't know if I should pass the mic to folks as they approach or what. Okay, thank you so much. So do we have any questions for Randy and Sarah?
I actually had a question. As I ran up before it was kind of a scattered question along the lines of first, from my experience talking, this is definitely not much.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Kind of what you guys are talking about, how it can be education and legacy. There we go. Education, legacy, and autonomy. So I guess my question is, in talking about that kind of work, what type of healing modalities, if any, were provided to communities talking about this type of trauma? because I know with my own family, I don't necessarily have all the language to talk about these things, and I definitely don't have all of the space within myself and the knowledge to talk about healing from that past. So, Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Even for myself, working with the Spelman scholars, we still open for oral history to be done with my family that I got to try to arrange. And it's very uncomfortable for them to, they'll tell me, oh yeah, set it up, blah, blah, blah. Then they'll say, oh, I can't do it, but it's really, do they want to revisit that? Do they have the faith in the system like that? If there was well-educated black family, maybe they would, right? My father graduated from high school, but he would tell me, his high school textbooks he knew that it said ninth grade, but since this is a senior, but his textbooks that being handed down is lesser grade. When I moved back, Chatham County now, in Savannah, Chatham County, the students that's in the 8th, 9th grade has a reading level of 2nd and 3rd graders. When I went to high school, it was the same way. We was majority black, and we wasn't taught the same thing as a white kid do, because they had other ways to test white kids to go to another school, even though if they lived in our district, which we knew they got better education there. So all we are taught is vocational, being taught to either weld or something like that, where we just working around the ports because that's where we are. So that the systematic racism thing happens right there in that town, where if you go there now, where before, when it was slavery time, it was all plantations, but now it's all warehouses in that area. Where blacks was living in Savannah, in the city limits, now they're pushing them out towards Port Wentworth. So basically, in my mind, I'm saying, hey, you just putting back the slaves where the plantations are, which is warehousing now. So you creating all the HUD houses, everything out to in Port Wentworth way, where they're closer to the job. So having that discussion with reparations, it's hard for them to have it. In their mind, they'd be like, okay, 25,000 or something is good, but is it? Would it really heal? For me, personally, as a black man in this country, this is the reparation that I get right here. What Sarah opened, what her family opened, to create a space for me to help others to see in another dynamic, help scholars that's really into this in their youth, to change a whole dynamic of the future. And that's what I care more about than, not to say I don't care about the elderly, what they think, but it's more of like how Mr. Alex said in the clip up there, it's about 3rd, 4th generations from now, where are we at? Are we still stuck in the past, or are we moving forward towards true reparations, which is complete healing, complete dynamic change of how America is. So that's what's more important to me, and that's what I try to get across more to the community that I'm in, to think that way.
And I would say, thank you for that question. And yeah, I don't think that we have done enough offering of frameworks around healing, nor have probably Randy and I engaged in enough processes that are to teach us how to talk to communities. We've kind of been going from the heart and the gut, and it's just a great point. I mean, even with the Spelman scholars and as educated as you can be, or not. It doesn't matter. You got to kind of be led through a healing process, and I don't think we have done enough of that.
Evelyn, yes, thanks, Lucia.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing and for what you just said. I mean, I thought that you are doing some healing yourself. That's pretty amazing. I have a lot of questions, but I'll just refrain myself to one, which is kind of following up what she previously asked in the context of you are unearthing several layers of history. There is the history of the land ownership. There is the history of ownership of individuals. And you are trying, and then you talk about you are looking for clean titles of land that was ceded or taken several generations ago. And you can even go as far back as you want to. How are you documenting what you're doing? And not documenting only for tracing, but as tools for healing. Because the history and the histories that are coming up and the one you are making, because you are also making history, could serve as tools to repair in the different contexts we want to look at it. So yeah, thank you.
You can do that first.
Okay. Thank you for that. Another great question. And the answer, basically, again, is we're not doing that enough. But I came to this project through writing, and I continue to try and write essays about the experience and process. That's a tiny part. We're participating with Just Futures centered out of University of Michigan. And it has 12 different universities participating. And we're on the Spelman University team, and part of what they're doing is documenting the work that largely Randy, and we haven't had time to talk too much about this, but Randy's done incredible community organizing work and healing work in Monteith with a partner, Tony, who was one of his childhood friends, and they've been sort of learning together, really with no formal training, how to bring the community together in trusting ways to try and either protect that land from this encroachment of development and or be able to know that they're going to get pushed out, and how can they get the best situation possible in that inevitable situation. So they've been working together to try to craft plans for what the community can come together and do and as such. So that part we have Spelman sort of documenting. We probably need to try and do more of it too. We were just talking about, we're kind of moving into a new phase where we have some more time to spend on this, and I think we will be spending more of our time as partners on documenting the processes. And I think, to be super honest, it's hard. We did not know what we were doing, right? And we've been feeling our way along and shooting from the heart, and it's hard to document something that you're not really sure you're doing right. But we need to do a better job of that. And I'm kind of hoping that Chris will just document it all and write it into create a class about it.
I was hoping that Professor Evelyn was going to do that. Yes, exactly. Other questions? Oh, we have two. I see, right there. And okay.
Thank you. So I think the state of California commissioned a group to do some investigatory work about possible frameworks for reparations. And in hearing you talk, I'm wondering if you have a feeling that maybe doing this, pursuing it through government structures even initially, might strategically be a bad way to go, because it might so quickly politicize this issue. And I'm wondering if your experience suggests that the NGO world, though, working with kind of a fundraising voluntary fundraising perspective first might strategically be a quicker, better, healthier way to that outcome.
For me personally, it could be, yes. We have a documentary coming out, part of, through the through the PBS in, November, October, some time frame like that. And that could create more media exposure. But yet, even working with South Carolina Hilton Head, they wanting to collaborate with us for their local governments. But for me personally is we like to choose who we work with from a personal level, not from a political level where they have an agenda. We did that, and for them it's more about the publicity they get, right? Not the work. They make a lot of promises, but don't keep it. And that's where we lose the Black community, is we say a lot of things and don't follow up with it, and then they lose faith. And then we're right back to maybe negative square 2 or whatever. You know, we trying to get back again. So, I mean, just keeping it genuine from the heart of how her family started, the Eisner family, the Keller family, even including with mine, just genuinely coming together. We try to keep the work that same way. So if we have a bad vibe with somebody, we don't, or they show us one instance. We had a couple of that showed us certain things that we don't work with no more because of that issue. So, and it still grew. And this is the beginning stage when we creating the reparation project, that we was like, oh man, this person is awesome. You know, it sold a good story, but it became personal. And once it became personal for certain people, meaning for their own individual gain, then it's not about the work.
And I would say I totally hear that question, and it could be true, but I like to think of it as big R reparations and small R reparations, and that what we're doing is certainly not big R reparations and cannot take the place of federal reparations. And so timing-wise, I'm not really sure. I know they both have to happen kind of at the same time. Like if we just backed off of federal reparations and local and state reparations, I don't think we'd ever get back the ground. So I don't think this comes first, but I think it has to happen federal, local, and heart level. And our ultimate goal is to touch enough individual hearts that will support federal reparations, because nothing else can close the wealth gap, you know, and nothing else can actually be reparations. We are doing repair, but.
I had a two-part question. One, I'm not clear, is the Quarterman name a given name? Or have you looked into the origins of that name and when it came about? And secondly, what are the goals of the project? Are there certain sectors to it, and what is your vision for how you'll achieve those different goals?
I'll take the first part.
I can't take it.
Quarterman's, far as I studied, it was a given name. From the story I have so far of doing my study is this gentleman called Reverend Robert Quarterman that was back in the 1700s, which was pastor. And if you read up a lot about it, it'll say he never owned slaves, but then he had a lot to do with plantations. So, I mean, come on. I mean, you know, it's right there. From the South Carolina to the Liberty County area, I didn't contact Mr. Bernard Quarterman, contacted me, which his grandfather was Albert Quarterman, who created the atomic bomb. So, he had a lot of knowledge about the Quarterman. He knew exactly to the number how many Quartermans there were in this country, which was like a little bit over 2,500, and one Hispanic Quarterman. So he followed us through our military career. He knew where I was stationed when he talking to me, so I knew he's doing the study. But I wanted to know my own origin first, before I even go to him and be like, this is what I got, because of how intense he's doing it. I don't want to interrupt that. And I want to know more about the Savannah Quartermans first. So that's how far I got back so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, but there's a second part to it. Oh,
yeah. Thank you for asking that. There are a few like specific goals, and then I think again we still feel new at this, and I think we still are hesitant to say to submit to any 5, 10, 20-year goals, because we don't know where it's going to go. We don't know what we're going to find. We don't know how the landscape will change, all of that. But a couple things we do know is that we want to finally clear that title for the Quarterman family. And our original goal was, we'll clear the title, and we'll help other families clear title. It might take us 5 years to clear this title, so that was quickly moved beyond, and that's why we moved in different kinds of land preservation. But we want to do that. We want to always be able to support the scholars that we've committed to for 3 years, 4 years, however, because they're cohorts, and we don't want to get into a position where we don't raise enough money and then we have to tell someone they don't get their scholarship. So we're kind of careful about that. And we want to continue to take money from white individuals who understand and want to redistribute wealth and offer repair. We do not want to submit for grants or take institutional money so that we can't work from our heart and pick our heart pieces, and we just don't think that's necessarily reparations or repair to take huge grants from corporations to, so we really focus on the interpersonal. And so we've had some folks say, you could, in 2 years you'll be raising $20 million. And we're like, we don't really want to do that necessarily. So I think our goal is kind of to be present and cautious and always connected and authentic with each other and see where we want to take it. Very un-Silicon Valley goal.
Oh, there's a question here.
Hi. I know you say you don't have a methodology to talk about the healing part, but I want to talk about your both experience. I think Andy or Randy?
Randy.
Randy, you mentioned a little bit what happens with your family and your community, the reparation and how hard it is. But I was wondering for you, how's it been you as a white woman? What's the healing that has happened in your side of your family? So, I mean, I know there's no methodology there, and I will develop that later, but I would like to hear that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, it's been a lot of healing and a lot of incredible conversations and loving conversations between family members, and again, just so lucky that everyone's like, go, do it. We're so glad somebody's finally, we didn't know how to talk about it really, and neither did I, but we're glad somebody's doing this. And I often say, as Charlie read about, I'm very conscious of that, sort of white savior trope, and I don't even feel like I'm offering, I don't feel like I'm offering help to Randy or to the Black community. I feel that I'm being allowed to participate in Randy's life and in his family's life and in the Black community's life as a complete gift that is healing me. So I probably, I feel like I'm getting more out of this than I'm giving. I don't know what else, I can't imagine a better definition for healing. I just feel like this is what I was always meant to do. And actually coming back here, I looked up my old transcripts and I realized Black Studies 60A was the first class I ever took at UCSB, in 1989. So I knew back then what I should be doing. Yeah, this whole thing has been incredibly healing for me.
there was a yes.
Thank you so much for coming to UCSB. I really enjoyed you guys' conversation. You mentioned earlier that this effort is apolitical, but in my mind, reparations never came because slavery never ended. It was reinvented into the prison industrial complex through the 13th Amendment. Do you think that we have to tear down the structure for reparations to be effective?
Absolutely. What else could I say?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in an institution, so I'm sure everybody knows. I believe in it. It has to be, it's like my uncle said, they got to be broken down and start over new with the right studies. I mean, the National African American Reparations Committee has a 10-point system. They've been working on that HR 40 for a long time. California has, Evansville has. If these individuals come together, work together with scholars like yourself, and come through a consensus of what would work for us without any outside interference. It just got to be us talking about it to say what needs to be done. And when we hand them the paper, say, here, this is what we need. This got to be done. Then they're like, okay, we move forward. Until that happens, we're just going to be recycling that whole, school to prison pipelines that's happening still. The image that we're being fed on TV all the time that keeps us thinking that we're villains. All this just going to keep going on and on and on until we change the narrative.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, absolutely. I think reparations is the midpoint. I mean, only once you get that sort of acknowledgement and payment and beginning of changing of systems, that's in the middle. That's not we're done. That's kind of where we'll have to start.
There were a couple of hands up here.
I appreciate you guys coming out. Really love the passion you guys bring to the table. It's kind of nice. Totally, for me, my journey with reparations, I've never really understood it. I understand societies have done it throughout histories all the time, but I never understood what it really would look like in our country, or even locally, even our county. So I was just excited to kind of come here and be part of the conversation. And so I really just enjoy how you guys are approaching it the small way and the personal way. I think it's showing me that reparations isn't just necessarily handing out money, but it could be also like the actual healing process of it. My question to you guys is, how do you, trying to find out how I can word this, how do you guys like reach out to like these middle income or middle class and lower class whites to like actually like want to give? Because when I look at, I work in finance, I'm really passionate about it. So I look at the wealth gap in the country. We know it's definitely more elite and handful of individuals that can gather most of the wealth and corporations themselves. And so we see like, every race, every income class is dropping when it comes to middle and low income class and wealth. So I find it hard to see how you can reach out to these white families to want to give, to want to redistribute wealth when they feel like maybe they're suffering themselves or might struggle. So I was just kind of curious like how you guys approach that, and like, I know it's a conversation, you guys are starting new, but I don't know, I'm just excited about it. And then the second part, last thing on that, is California, the state plan, like you were talking about, handing that. Do you guys feel like that is a good approach? Do you feel like that would actually help with healing? Or do you feel like more on a local level, like with land preservation, education, stuff like that, do you feel like that would be actually more beneficial?
Maybe I'll do the first, you do the second part?
Yeah.
Or something? Okay. Thank you for that question. The short answer is I don't reach out to those people. I don't do, and I say I because I lead most of the fundraising because I'm asking white people to give. Don't take money from black people. Some reparations groups do, and I just don't really think that's an act of repair to ask black people to give money. I have not reached the point where I have to like pound the pavement and fundraise, so we've been focused on what can we afford to do that means a lot to us. And luckily, we have enough people who just get it, who have offered up their redistribution of wealth. If we wanted to claim, and there are people in the space, you know, like any space, there's some that like, we want to win the reparations space, we're going to raise it, you know, and it's like, no, just let's do what we can with the people that we reach. That's kind of what we've, but I have had a lot of folks, I respond to every new gift of money we get, whether it's $10 or $1,000 or whatever, I immediately write that person back and say, how did you hear about us? And like, if you're willing to tell me your story, what is it? One time it was, you know, a 12-year-old kid who just said, I don't have much, but I heard about this and I wanted to give $10, you know. We have, you know, just very surprising thing. I'll do a quick story. I'm gonna talk about Clara.
Okay, yeah.
My swim group, two of whom are here, Katie and Laura, and I know you're connected to Laura, is an amazing group of people who have been supportive from day one of this, and talking with them is kind of a lot of how I've gotten some of these connections, like through Katie, through the attorneys, and just talking about it like in my normal life. At swim practice, whatever. And so last week, someone else that we swim with, she is a Chinese American, grew up in the South. Her dad's been dealing, her dad had a stroke, he's failing, and I've been sort of talking to her about that. And she said, last week, she just said, you know, my dad owns, 20 acres of land in Alabama, and we want to give it to you. We want to give it to the Reparations Project, and we want you to find a black family to give this land to steward the land. And she has no, I mean, her family's origins in China, and like, you know, she just gets it. Like, you know, she's like, I know that I haven't been subject to the same oppression. I may not be white, but I'm benefiting from the same system. So it's like, I just find that the more I and my friends talk about this story and just being okay with talking about it, the more people sort of say, oh, I recognize how I've benefited too. And it does not have to be 20 acres of land or $100,000. It honestly can be $5, it can be $10. I mean, that means just as much to us. I mean, just to have someone say, oh, I understand. We don't expect them to close the wealth gap, you know? And I think that's the key. We know we can't solve the problem financially, but we can share the personal healing process we're going through and hope to touch people. So, and then the other part of your question was more like local and state reparations, and do we think that's...
Well, just think like that is coming from taxpayers, aka the general public. So I had a moment where I was thinking like, what do you guys feel about that being, like, would that actually heal?
Oh.
I don't know, that's not...
I believe it could heal with the right plan that's executed correctly. It can, and the right people that's on the committee that's ensuring that integrity is held, not falling victim to the whole personal gain, but really for the cause. But going back to your first question, what middle-class whites can do is they control a lot of their politicians, local politicians. So it don't have to be money, it's their vote. It's to circle the end. So if they're like, hey, we're gonna get you out of office if you don't say nay to, let's say these federal aids that's going to another world. I was part of it. I went to Iraq. I know how much money was spent there. That could have healed. That could have been part of reparations. That could have been part of a lot of corrections in this country. But the middle class that controls the votes doesn't go with that plan. They just go with what they're saying instead of actually controlling their own narrative and their own power. So if that was to happen, I think we'd be more, it'll be better for them. Because we understand the whole dynamic of how financial system is going right now because of we couldn't control those in the seats. So.
Thank you for the conversation. I really enjoy it. I'm very new to United States. I just moved here last September, and I'm a TA here at the geography department, and I'm leading this weekly discussion on human geography. And last week we touched upon this topic on gentrification, and I have to present the student with the history of what happened last century where there's this white flights from the urban area, and then when there's when after the Civic War, there this crowd or like black people move up from the south to northern cities, and it's a very heavy topic for me. When I presented to the students, I don't get much feedback from them. They were just sitting there and they were just looking at me, and I don't know what to do. It just, for me, I felt like I need to do more, just besides just presenting whatever happened in the history. But I feel I don't know what I can do. I try to be authentic with them, saying that I'm sorry, like I don't know what else I can like present to you, but but then when I saw the email sending out saying that this conversation is happening, I felt like, oh, there's more I can learn. Like maybe there are other things that I can do in the classroom discussion-based settings. And you were talking also about this kind of more personal and authentic ways that you're taking in conversations for reparation. I kind of just wonder what I can do, like in a more academic or education setting. Like, is there some way that I can introduce more instead of just presenting the textbook content? And does this reparation has to be done in like a very formal setting where everybody's prepared to talk about it, or is it appropriate for me to? And also because of my identity, I do feel very afraid to talk about it, and I don't know how like let's say black students in my class, there are 2 of them. Like how do they perceive me talking about this history of them or probably not even their history. I don't know. Like there's so many gaps between this kind of conversation that's happening. So, yeah, this is a long question. I'm so sorry, but
thank you for the biggest question I've ever been asked.
Yeah, I really come here with a purpose, so I really need to ask this question. But thank you all for hearing.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think the only thing I can say to that is thank you for wanting to be able to talk about it. I don't know how to, advise you not only within this institution, but in general about how appropriate it is or how it can be better, but it's amazing that you want to try instead of just saying, okay, well that didn't go over well. We'll just move on to something else. And for what it's worth, I would suggest, especially because we're in California and we're talking today about how one of the sort of false narratives is that, okay, this all happened in the South, and I think most of us probably in this room understand that California is just as complicit in especially the legacy of slavery. And there's an incredible book, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein out of Berkeley, and he really focuses on communities in California and the gentrification and more specifically redlining, and what happened in really identifiable communities like the one that I live in. And what I saw be very powerful in Menlo Park was a group called Menlo Park Together came together and they created like the Menlo Park version of The Color of Law, and then they opened it up to the community, and everyone came to see like exactly how our community had been gentrified and redlined, and all of this stuff. And so I mentioned that because he has a really, look him up, because he has a kind of a short cartoon, brilliant video that kind of shows the whole history of California, legacy of slavery in like 15 minutes. So maybe you could show something like that, I don't know.
So I have it's a strange question, but one that I find fascinating in the stories that you're telling. And so in one instance, this is a very American story, and the question is sort of related to your backgrounds before the United States. And the reason I'm asking this question, like Charleston was a major slave port for a lot of people in that region, and even the description of a rice plantation painting, and the Geechee Gullah, who were worked mostly on rice plantations, and even that area of Savannah. And so I'm curious, what was the origin story of both of your families? Because I speculate there's historical records that would capture what particular period of time that you came to the United States for both of you, and which ports. So do you know that pre-American history, and do you have some speculations about where your people are from, both on your paternal side and your maternal side?
Yeah, so linking back to Mr. Bernard Quarterman, talking with him for a couple of hours, he would give me the names of the Quartermans that was actually athletes, boxers, football players, basketball players, like all throughout the 1900s. And he was like, majority of us was Mandingo from Sierra Leone. And then when I think about my grandfather, how at like 72, he would carry a cross tire. If you know what a cross tire is, that's on a railroad track. That thing is like heavy. And his brute strength of doing that at 72. And I remember his hands and feet was like scales, but just looking at him at that age, so strong, put two and two together for me what Mr. Bernard Quarterman said. Now for me, that's my black side. On my Japanese side, goes back to Pei-Ching Shimoji, which in 1655, he studied agriculture in Miyako Islands, which he went and planted trees. So on part of Miyako Island, there's a city named after Shimoji, which we knew already. But after World War II, of course, all that wealth and everything else is disseminated, destroyed. And then in the 1950s, they came to Okinawa to try to better their lives, which they was poor, uneducated, because the school systems was all controlled by the United States military. And that's where the period of where my father was in Okinawa during the late 60s and early 70s with the Okinawa reversism, where they was trying to take back Okinawa from the U.S. government, so they held riots. But they was talking a lot with the black groups, like the Bushmasters. The list goes on and on. These guys was like almost like Black Panther guys that was fighting the system of within Vietnam of the government, but working together with the Okinawans. They learned how to organize. So those histories not even told. But for me to understand that part, it makes me kind of proud. At the same time, now, when I mentioned I'm the 5th generation of Zeke Quarterman the enslaved, a piece of me get taken every time. Just to be affiliated with being enslaved. It takes my manhood, just chips away at it. But when my father said, you're the perfect person for it, it gives me the Japanese side to hold on to that, and I could refill that broken piece and come and do this here. Because if I was in my father's shoes, I don't think I could sit here if I thought like how he did, it would be too much. You know, he wouldn't. So I understand their like hesitancy in talking about reparations and everything like that. When you're studying it, it's okay. You're going to school, you're studying it, you're talking about it. That's okay. But if you living a day for day, going through generational trauma, fear of the system depriving you of anything, at the same time you living in poverty, how can you still talk about reparations or hope that, you know? So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and my dad is from Seattle, and his grandparents came from Switzerland, and so I know, and he's got family trees, but I never really knew that side. My mom's side, that's where all the history keeping is, and and as I was telling you, like partially because there's a lot of intermarrying within the family in the South with landowners trying to keep land in the family, so that the tree kind of goes. But I know all of that, and back to like, you know, the first Keller in the 1790s, and I think from Germany.
Folks, it is time. Do I have time for one more? Yes, one more. You're going to take the last question.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
This is for Sarah. You talked earlier about raising 2 white sons, and that you needed them to see history not in the context of shame or guilt, but in this context of responsibility. What is their responsibility?
Thank you for that question, and I think, well, it can be answered so many different ways. For me, I think I define love as truth-telling, and I define responsibility as truth-telling, and a lot more. But number one, it means facing the truth, telling the truth, and you know, talking about it. That I think naturally leads to being able to stand up to all the little racist comments that, you know, we still hear all the time. To be able to understand, even as teenagers, when they hear adults say things that don't feel right in their heart. And then hopefully whatever kind of work they choose, whether it has to do with, you know, something that has nothing to do with social science that we would think of, like what, I mean, I don't expect them to go become massive activists. I don't think that, you know, they don't have a particular responsibility to be any one thing. They have a responsibility to be who they are and to understand their place in history and the types of privileges they have, and to be able to live in that context and encourage others to be able to do that too. I mean, I think the biggest thing we're seeing today is, you know, this resistance to telling the truth of history and to learning about it in school. And I think like the most damaging thing that parents can do to kids is to run to try and save them if they feel uncomfortable, you know, about something. And so, you know, I'm sure they have felt uncomfortable at times. And I think the answer is not, oh my gosh, who made you feel this way? But yeah, it's freaking uncomfortable. Let's talk about what role you can have in changing that history. So yeah, I don't have a specific definition. I just am really hopeful. I was really hopeful when they were small. They're now incredible young men that have made all of these dreams come true. But, you know, just to be able to handle the truth and to tell it and to call people out when they're not telling it.
So listen, folks, thank you so much for coming. Let's give a round of applause to Sarah and Randy. Thank you so much. Okay. And I just wanted to point out to people that there's a reception taking place next door. If you have some time and if you would like some refreshments. Thank you so much for coming again. Thank you.